The Knights Templar are one of the most fascinating yet misunderstood religious orders of the Middle Ages. In this video, I'm going to be looking at their properties and activities in Yorkshire, and thankfully this is not going to turn into a Dan Brown novel filled with conspiracies. So let's look at this part of Yorkshire's hidden history. Churches, banners, kings and queens, factories and big machines, castles, forts and in-betweens are stories that are told. The Knights Templar were really called the Order of the Poor Knights of Christ of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, which is quite a mouthful, so they're just the Knights Templar for short. They were founded in the 12th century by Bernard de Clairvaux to protect pilgrims who were coming under attack on their way to Jerusalem. Following the rule of the Cistercians, which was a reformed offshoot of the Benedictine order, which you can find out more about in my medieval monasteries video, they lived a life of both prayer and practical activity. Dedicating themselves to the cause of the Crusades, they supported it through prayer, financial donations, and they soon became skilled scholars, fighters, bankers, landowners and farmers. The main thing we're going to look at are their preceptories, of which they had 10 in Yorkshire. A preceptory is essentially a cross between a manor house and a monastery, where they could both live their religious life and combine it with the needs of running the land. The Templars first came to England in 1128, and the first preceptory in Yorkshire was in 1142. Yorkshire would have the largest number of Templar preceptories in the country, so with the background out of the way, let's start looking at them. Let's start with the first preceptory built in Yorkshire, which was at Temple Cowton near Northallerton. Built in around 1142, it lies on what is called Deer Street, which was originally a Roman road stretching all the way from York to the Firth of Forth. This was a really important location for the Templars because it was a good stop-off point on the journey to their properties in Scotland. In fact, even Edward I stayed there on his way to fight William Wallace. When the Templars were dissolved, a chest was found containing records of all the properties in Yorkshire as well as some in England and Scotland. This means it was perhaps one of the most important sites in Yorkshire. Nothing remains of the property now, however records state that it once held a hall, kitchen, chapel, chamber, brewhouse and smithy. Now this isn't going to be an exhaustive look at every single property the Templars owned, because that would honestly be ridiculous and take forever, but rather this is going to be looking at the major preceptories under which fell a lot of the smaller buildings. Moving over west, near the magnificent Jervaux Abbey, is a preceptory at Pennell. Situated in a somewhat remote area of Wensleydale, it gives a stunning view of the countryside. Built in 1142, it was only uncovered during the 19th century and only the foundations of buildings remain. 3 stone coffins and their cover slabs lie in the centre, and when originally found, these contained human remains, although the remains have since disappeared. The site is important as it lies so close to Jervaux Abbey, which is perhaps the finest Cistercian monastery in England. The Templars, following the rule of the Cistercians, would naturally want to be close by. A lot of Yorkshire fell under William the Conqueror's scorched earth policy, otherwise known as the Harrying of the North, in 1069 and 1070. This utterly destroyed a lot of farmland, but the Templars managed to turn what was essentially wasteland into fertile, productive and profitable farms. Moving into the West Riding, perhaps the most famous Templar property is Temple Newsome in Leeds. Although known today for its 16th century country house which sits on 1,500 acres of stunning parkland, the land close by was actually owned by the Templars in the 12th century. Not far from the house, in what is now parkland, was a preceptory built by the Templars between around 1154 and 1165. Nothing remains now, but we know quite a bit about what was there. Around 2,000 acres, given to them through gifts and grants, were used as farmland, meadows, fisheries, pastures and other farming spaces. They also had 3 mills, 2 for corn and 1 for fulling. Fulling is a process by which wool is softened by drawing out lanolin, a type of grease found in wool. Previously, fullers would stamp the wool soaked with urine with their feet for hours, but these new water-powered mills sped up the process and made it much quicker. These mills would have been powered by water from the River Aire, and there's some evidence of a watercourse dug from the River Aire to Temple Newsome. So the Templars had huge influence on the Yorkshire wool industry. They were known for their high-quality fleece, and it would often be exported to places like Flanders, Lille and Arras. Profits made from this wouldn't be kept by the Templars themselves, but sent to the central London branch, which then passed the money on to the Holy Land. There used to be some Templar crosses visible on buildings in Leeds city centre, but many of these have disappeared now. Moving over to the East Riding, Faxfleet lies at the confluence of rivers which flow into the Humber estuary, the heart of Yorkshire's maritime heritage. The Preceptory at Faxfleet, built around 1185, was to become one of the richest and most prized Templar preceptories. It is one of only 2 preceptories to have access to the coast and was most likely used as a port. It was so important that it was visited by multiple kings multiple times. Edward I visited there, and even after the dissolution of the order, it was visited by Edward II and Henry IV. The land in this area would have been quite marshy, but during this period a major land reclamation was underway and the Templars were able to transform it into fertile farming land. This was an important repository for documents about the order's possessions in Scotland, and by 1308 this was the most valuable preceptory in the country. Unfortunately, Faxfleet fell into disuse due to a lack of good administration and a loss of patronage by the king. It was soon superseded by Hull, which, in 1205, had become the 6th most important port in England. The Templars would have undertaken a key charitable responsibility in the local community. They were required to give 1/10 of their food to the poor as part of the rule of the religious order. At the orders of King Stephen, at dusk every day a horn would be blown to let travellers and the poor know that they were welcome for food and had a bed for the night. The next few preceptories are ones which we don't know much about. There was one at Templehurst near Selby, built in around 1152. A single Norman doorway remains, but it has been built into a farm nearby called Preceptory Farm. At Foulbridge, near Moulton, is a surviving Templar barn which was only rediscovered in 1981. Although it's now part of private property, fortunately there are public images available. There was also one at Copmanthorpe near York, which was in existence by 1258. The final 2 preceptories are at Ribston with Wetherby and at Whitley near Nottingley. Founded 1217, the Preceptory at Ribston with Wetherby lies on the Great North Road between London and Edinburgh, and so would have been an important trading and travelling location. Finally, the last Preceptory at Whitley near Nottingley, historians don't actually know whether it existed or not. They can't seem to agree, and we know next to nothing about it, so it's a rather fitting end to the long list of Templar properties. Now we come to the end of the Templars. King Philip IV of France ordered that all Templar members should be arrested on Friday the 13th of October 1307. There's several theories as to why he did this, ranging from the sensible to the absurd, but the most prevailing and the most likely is that he simply wanted their money. As we've seen, they owned an incredible amount of land and were quite wealthy, and France's economy was struggling at the time. In addition, by the early 14th century, the Crusades were failing, and the Templars were being criticised for their role in the failures of the Crusades. Philip wrote to all the heads of state who had Templar members in their country, ordering that they should arrest them. Edward II of England refused, but this was slightly awkward because he was due to marry Philip's daughter Isabella in 1308. As much as Edward protested these actions, he was eventually forced to comply. Pope Clement V, a very good friend of Philip, issued a papal bull saying it was now mandatory for Templar members to be arrested on pain of excommunication. Not wanting to be excommunicated, Edward went along with it. Although the orders to arrest the members were supposed to be kept secret, word must have gotten out because around half of the preceptory owners had escaped, presumably. Only around half of them were actually among those arrested. And luckily for those arrested, Edward felt that, it kind of done the spirit of the bull. His heart wasn't really into it. He didn't agree at all with the order to arrest them. In fact, most of them stayed in relative luxury. The ones in Yorkshire were kept in Clifford's Tower in York, and they were allowed to walk freely around the city during the day. They fared a lot better than their counterparts in France, many of whom were actually burnt at the stake. It wasn't until 1310 that an order was made that, maybe the prisoners should actually stay in prison. What is remarkable is that when the Templar preceptors in Yorkshire were brought to trial, out of 56 witnesses brought, only one ever accused one of misconduct. and all the evidence brought to them was just rumours and hearsay about witchcraft, gay orgies, idolatry and heresy. In the end, no Templar in Britain was ever put to death. They were granted absolution and reconciliation back into the church after repentance, and many joined existing monastic orders. We know that at least one joined Kirkstall Abbey and another joined Fountains Abbey. The rest simply disappear from the pages of history. Meanwhile, Edward II started a detailed record of everything owned by the Templars, and we actually have a fantastic amount of information available as to what they owned. Faxfleet, for example, the wealthiest preceptory, was worth £290, 4 shillings and 10 pence, which, if an online historical currency converter is reliable, is equal to around £178,000 in today's money. The total value of Yorkshire preceptories was around £856,000 in today's money, making Yorkshire the wealthiest Templar county in the country. So what happened to the Templar properties? Well, whatever could be sold was, and a lot of it was handed over to the Knights Hospitaller, which was another military religious order. The rest just fell into ruin and are no longer today. So there we have it. There's a brief look at the history of the Knights Templar in Yorkshire. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon.